and sits fascinated in front of the TV. As soon as the bishop is through, he goes back to his diggings. I also received a letter from a little girl in the Bronx who told me that her canary never sings except when I am on the air. I want you to know that I have the highest rating in television among the cats and dogs and birds. You've heard of Hep cats, now there are Sheen cats. I have a suspicion, however, that this cat in Philadelphia spends the rest of his 8 lives with Milton Berle. And then I received also a letter from Pittsburgh, in which the mother told me that her 4-year-old daughter, every night when I finish television, she goes up and kisses the screen. So I always get the greeting through an admiral. And then there was a little girl in Toledo. She was aged 4, and she comes in also and sits through the entire telecast. And her mother was amazed and said, "Why do you sit so still and quiet when you listen to him?" She says, "Just in order to hear him say at the end, 'God love you.'" And then the little girl said, "You know, Mommy, as long as we love, we live. But if we don't love, we die." And thus out of the mouths of babes and sucklings come wisdom. And with that as a prelude, what are we talking on tonight? Oh, yes, passions. Human passions and emotion. Now, there are 2 extreme views of passions and emotions. One view was the old Greek view that passions are all wrong. That was the philosophy of the Stoics. And then there was the philosophy of the Epicureans, who believed that you should always give way to your passions. Now, that has its modern counterpart, or rather both of those systems. And first of all, the view, particularly in the last century, that one should never show any emotion, never any enthusiasm, never manifest a passion, with the possible exception of anger. The result was the 19th century went around like children suppressing a giggle. It is said, I do not know whether it is true or not, that the English, to some extent, favored that view. At any rate, I know of an Englishman who attended the World Series last year at a time when Willie Mays made that famous impossible catch. And 80,000 people stood up and cheered and applauded Willie Mays. This Englishman sat through the whole proceedings and said, "Well caught, Gubbins, well caught, Gubbins." And then from that extreme, we've gone to the extreme today where it is believed that if a person is psychotic, if he's neurotic, if he's a baseball player and bats below 249, if he plays golf and hits in the 90s, if his business is failing, if his wife doesn't love him, it's because he's not been self-expressive. That emotions are always, always right. And they always, too, assume that there's only one emotion, generally our age, and that is the emotion of sex. During the 19th century, one hardly ever spoke of it. So in the beginning of this century, it was said, you know, the trouble with the 19th century, the reason it had so many social problems was because it hushed up the subject of sex. If we would only just bring it out into the open, then we'd have no more social problems. Well, in this century, we've given sex the same ventilation that Swiss cheese has, but we still got our social problems. Incidentally, why is it the only cheese they ventilate is the kind that doesn't need it, namely the Swiss cheese? As a matter of fact, there's another view which denies passions, which enthrones them, and that is the view that passions are a very integral part of man. And to understand that, it must be recalled that man is composed of body and soul. He is composed of matter and spirit, finite and the infinite. Inasmuch as he has a body, he is like animal and has the same emotions. Inasmuch as he has a soul, he has some resemblance to God. Now, the body of man has not one passion. As a matter of fact, we have 11 passions. Basically 11. Love and hate, joy and sorrow, fear and aversion. I wonder if I'm going to think of them all. When I get nervous, if I can't, won't that be awful? Won't you get afraid if I can't think of them all? Hope and despair, and I have forgotten one. It's all right, I tell you. You look them up like I did. You know where you'll find them? The best treatise that's ever been written on passions, the very best. You can follow modern psychologists as I have, but you'll find nothing comparable to them written in question 124, Article 4, and 24, Question 24, and Article 1 and following of the Summa. Almost forgot that reference. Well, there are 11 passions in all. Now, what is interesting about these passions is that they act very differently inside of us than they do inside of an animal. The reason they act differently inside of us is simply because we have a soul. We have a knowledge. That is why, for example, hydrogen is not the same in water as it is in sulfuric acid. The symbol of one is H2O, the symbol of the other H2SO4. Colors on a palette are not just the same as the colors that are mixed in a painting, because they're in a different composite. Sex is not the same in a pig, sex in a man. Hence, an animal can be promiscuous and not have any mental problems. Man is promiscuous, and he has all kinds of mental problems. Never heard of a rooster going to a psychiatrist? And one of the reasons that a man has these particular problems is because he has infinite desires for love that cannot be completely satisfied in a body that is finite. Hence the terrific tensions. Now, if emotions and passions are different in a man than they are in an animal, it is always because in a human being, a passion is preceded by knowledge, by will, by reason, by some information about an object. An idea is always the conduit of an emotion for man. Now, take, for example, anger. There always has to be an idea that precedes the emotion of anger. I heard it, for example, of a suburbanite up in Westchester who, before he was going to work one morning, was asked by his wife, "Would you please go out, John, into the kitchen and give Hilda a good talking to?" He said, "I thought she was getting along all right." Wife says, "She is, but today's the day she beats her carpets, and she always does it better when she's mad." There had to be some idea preceding the emotion of anger. Now, take, for example, hope. A girl has a hope to be married. She has a hope chest. She may boast that she's been asked 20 or 30 times to get married, always by her father and mother. But she cannot have the emotion of hope without reference to some kind of a man. Incidentally, I have a cousin who proposed to the same girl 10 times. He's been turned out so often it looks like a bedspread. I know one man who said that his wife was even-tempered. She was always mad. But there had to be some idea preceding it. Take, for example, fear. A husband is late coming home from work. And that idea of my husband being late begins to excite all kinds of emotions. Maybe he's run off with another woman. Maybe he fell down a manhole. And finally, she's in a terrific state of excitement. Did you ever notice, incidentally, the different reaction of a man, a husband, and a wife when each is late? If a wife comes home, the husband says, "I've been waiting for you, dear. I've been worried." The wife is always flattered. If the husband comes home late, and the wife has been waiting, says she has, the husband always gets mad. Just as soon as she says she's worried, he gets mad. I do not know why there's this different reaction in these two human beings, but it happens to be the fact. Take, for example, the emotion of sorrow. Why does one weep? Simply because one has a knowledge of a death, a bereavement, an accident of some kind. It is the idea that produces the tears. So it is very important, therefore, to realize that in us there is always a knowledge that precedes an emotion. Now let us go on from there to the relationship between character and emotion. First of all, we can develop character or we can destroy it. One may be a normal character or one may be abnormal. What is a normal being? A normal human being is one whose emotions are under the control of reason and will, the moral law. Therefore, this is the relationship. His emotions, his passions, are all subject to right reason, to a standard, to a moral law. I heard once of a radio station in the Middle West that got a letter from an old man. He said, "Would you please, sometime on your program, strike the note A? I have an old fiddle and it's out of tune, and I get so much enjoyment out of it, I want to have it tuned." He recognized a standard. Once that standard was given, then he was happy. The reason is the standard. Now here, for abnormality, you have some such relationship as this, in which reason and the noble part of man is subjected to the emotions. In order to understand precisely how this operates, suppose that I hate to draw, but I guess I better draw. All right. Never mind. Here is a stairs. What are you laughing at? You recognize it? I'm afraid to go any further. That's a door. And there's a man at the door, top of the door. This is a cellar. And down here are the emotions. Now, just as a man in a house will use his reason to determine who is going to come up those stairs, so he will use his reason to determine what emotions are going to possess him and to what extent. For example, a man will allow perhaps his dog in the house, but he'll not allow every dog in the neighborhood. A woman will allow her own child in, but not allow every child in the block. And then maybe we may not allow her own child to come in if the child's feet are dirty. There's always some reason, some determination, some standard used. Now, it's exactly the same with the way reason works, for example, in regards to lights. You don't mind looking at an electric lamp as you read. You're looking at light now as you look at your television screen. But you would not look at an ultraviolet light because that's too strong. You would be very willing to listen to a sound as you're listening to the sound of my voice now, but you would not use your ears to listen to an explosion. You would say, no, that is not reasonable. I will not use my ears that particular way. You would use fire to warm your hands, but you'd not put your hands into the fire. Use water to wash your hands, but you would not use water to drown yourself. Exactly the same principle is to be used in relationship to emotions and to passions. Reason will determine their use. Reason and will has control over them and can do whatever it pleases with them. For example, there are those in our contemporary world, for example, who say, speaking of the emotion of love in the form of sex, there's nothing wrong with sex. Nothing to be ashamed of it. Certainly not. If you mean it as a gift of God for the propagation of the human species. In that sense, we would say, nothing wrong with eating. Why be ashamed of that? Is there something wrong at slobbering at table? Though we have the instinct to eat? Is there something wrong even about eating your soup with a loud noise? I knew an Englishman who dropped all his H's when he drank alphabet soup. So every single passion, therefore, is to be brought under the control of right reason. Now suppose we come to the abnormal character. In the abnormal character, we have, again, our stairs. You know, my angel forgot to erase the last time. He had his eraser caught under his left wing. And suppose you shot reason. You did not believe in reason. And here's poor reason out here, all dead. And so the emotions now are allowed to come up, to assert themselves, to give way to every single one, never control them. With what result? Well, with the result that one becomes nothing but a center of conflicting forces. Very much like, for example, the demon, the young man out of whom our blessed Lord cast the devil. And our Lord said to the devil and the young man, "What is your name?" And the devil said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." No unity of personality. I believe that when people give themselves over excessively, now the important word here is excessively. For example, excessively or almost exclusively to the reading of romances, to listening to dramas on television, in order that they may have their emotions awakened. These people have their emotions aroused, love and hate and fear and daring and anger and so forth, for a hero, against an injustice. But they're all against mythical characters, and after a while the emotions fall back upon themselves, dead and inert. The result is that their emotional life becomes very much like a screen door in the summertime. Children play with the screen, tug at it, plug, pull at it, and as a result, the screen door will not close eventually. And so emotions become so tattered and so worn that eventually, when a real object presents itself to the mind, where there ought to be real love, where there ought to be real hate, where there ought to be anger, where there ought to be a vindication of justice, the emotional life is so tattered and worn and destroyed that we have no crusades and no action. I think that is the reason why there is not much action in political life against traitors, for example, against juvenile delinquents, and against any kind of evil. And hence, for the restoration of peace, it must be recognized that it is possible for every human being to lock out some of these passions and to enthrone reason here, to open the door, and to have reason, the moral law, and faith decide what emotion will possess them and to what extent. Mary Magdalene came out of an emotional cellar such as this and became a saint. Peter had weakness, but he became a saint. And so it is possible for anyone who may live down in these cavernous, libidinous depths to arouse his reason, to arouse his faith, to arouse eternity and the moral law. And this is the kind of enthusiasm and faith that the world needs today. As a matter of fact, we do not have enough passion. There once was a passion that began on a day when love went freely to death in order to save the world. It was a passion that swept the world, and it was a passion that was inspired by truth, by right reason, by submission to the will of the Heavenly Father. That is the kind of passion for truth that gives peace and emotional life stability. One step beyond that mediocrity, and we are saved. Bye now, and God love you.
It began here, in the upper room, 2,000 years ago. This is my body. This is my blood. Remember me. In a garden he prayed to his Father on a night of betrayal, torture, death, far from Galilee. When taken from his rack of torment, in a borrowed grave he lie. On the third day the angel said, "He has risen. He did not die." After sharing with friends, he rose to the Father, leaving his spirit love to guide our journey. For he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, together again. People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century.
One is to be. You see, I heard many a woman say, "I must now put on my face." Did you ever hear that? I heard of one who said, "I must now put on my eyes. I must now put on my lips." Well, is one the same person with a new face, new eyes, new lips, without them? Some women need only two things to make them beautiful: soap and water, and others need many other things. I heard of a man who had a choice to marry an opera singer who was very ugly, sang beautifully, and an uneducated cook who was very beautiful. He finally decided that he had better marry the opera singer because she would give him more prestige. So it was decided. First morning after the honeymoon, woke up, took a look at the opera singer, and he said, "For heaven's sake, sing!" See, he had a problem, too, the identity crisis. Much has been written about it, particularly by Erickson, and he restricted it to some extent to youth. But it is not a phenomenon that belongs to youth alone, this discovery of self. The young indeed have it because the young people do have a terrible crisis. A young person reaches an age where he wants to be himself. He separates from parents. I want to be an individual. But at the same time that he wants to be an individual, he wants to conform to what everyone else is doing. Wear the same clothes, talk the same language, love the same music. But old people have the crisis, too, of discovering which is self. The difference between the young and the old in an identity crisis is that the old in the identity crisis look back to deny the past and responsibility. And the young look to the future and deny the responsibility of the future. So both of them have trouble. Now I'm going to give you three kinds of, well, identity crises. The point is, and this is the reason we've chosen this telecast, is one must be careful in seeking identity to discover which self one really is. And I think that today I will ask my angel to leave all the writing on the blackboard, unless I change my mind, so that you can see the three. The first kind of crisis is this, where a person wears the mask but has no face. That is to say, a perpetual phony. There was someone who wrote a poem some years ago, and the poem was about a woman who was always seen holding a mask before her face. She held it sprightly and gaily. And one day someone pulled away the mask, and there wasn't any face. She was just her sham. So some say they are their true selves when they're only the mask. Take, for example, an alcoholic. An alcoholic is completely identified with his alcohol. He will say, well, this is my nature. I can't help it. It's the way I am. Or an LSD victim. They never try to get below that mask to discover their real self. It was just that made T.S. Eliot, the poet, speak of ourselves as being hollow men, straw men. And he says that when the world ends, the world that's full of hollow men, it will end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Some keep this masquerade, this phoniness, this hypocrisy so much before them that they would hardly recognize their true self if they met it. The Danish philosopher and theologian Kierkegaard told a very interesting story about a peasant who had saved up enough money to buy himself some new boots and new colored stockings. He came into town, bought the boots and the colored stockings. He had some money left, so he got drunk. And he threw himself in the curb. Funny how often drunks end in curbs, isn't it? I heard of one drunk who was walking along with his foot on the curb and the other in the gutter. And the cop came along and said, "You're drunk." He said, "Oh, thank God, I thought I was a cripple." Well, this, I'm sorry I interrupted the story. But at any rate, this drunk threw himself in the curb, and another peasant came along with a cart and horse, and he shouted to the drunk. He says, "Get out of the way. I'll run over you." And the drunk said, "I don't care. They're not my legs." He didn't know himself with his new boots and his new stockings. And he was just so much his old self that he couldn't tell the new. And that's the way people are with the mask without the face. They have no care for others. As Peer Gynt in the work of Conrad, said the people are sometimes met in mental institutions. He said they have no care for others. They live in a barrel of self, and they're corked with a bung of self. No concern, no love, no care. Like a priest was telling me some time ago, talking about not caring, about a former pastor years ago that bought a horse. And he said to the farmer, "Can it see all right?" "Oh, yes," he said. "Sees perfectly." "Can it run all right?" "Yes." So he picked up a stone. He threw it at the horse, ran like a racehorse. It ran right into a tree. And the priest said to the farmer, "I thought you said that the horse could see all right." He says he does, but he just doesn't give a darn. Well, that's the way people are. People are that wear the mask but no face. They have no care of others, no love of neighbor. They've lived in this make-believe world so long, and they say, "This is my true identity." That's why one has to be so careful about saying, "I must seek my identity." What kind of identity is one seeking? This kind of mockery has some bad effects. It has psychic effects, which cannot be ignored. There was a German war story told about a Jewish couple who had a son who was paralyzed. And they went to a neighbor and they said to the neighbor, "We are Jews, we're going to be killed by Hitler. But we want you to take care of this paralyzed son of ours. We'll give you this house, we'll give you our property. But just care for him." The neighbor promised to do it. He killed the son, confiscated the property, and lived on it. And then a lump began to appear in the back of his neck. And he would press it, and it would come out on his forehead. And he'd press the forehead, come out on his chest. Press it there, it would come out somewhere else. So though people wear the mask, though they have this kind of makeup, they nevertheless are psychologically disordered on the inside until they discover their true self. But there's another step. And the second step is the mask that knows it has a face, though it is only a subconscious knowledge. See how good my angel is? He doesn't erase today. Remember other times I could go there and write something and immediately he would clean it. Have you ever been able to figure out why he doesn't erase some days? I'm not telling him. The angels are much wiser than men. And they're much wiser than anyone on a television show, too. Well, there's the mask that knows it has a face. I suppose a good example of this kind of identity crisis would be a woman who comes home from a ball, a dance. I didn't mean ball in the modern sense of the word. Dance, and she's been in evening clothes, has on jewels, and her hair was well adorned, and her eyes, maybe her eyelashes made long, and so on and so forth. She comes home, the dance is over, and she sits before the mirror, looks at herself. Maybe she says, I'm beautiful. This is the real me. That's not bad grammar, but that's what she might say. This is the real I. If she were a school teacher, she would say, or came from Boston. And yet she knows that in a little while she's got to take off that makeup. She knows there's a face under that. Maybe she'll put on another kind of face. I heard of a woman who put on so much cold cream and oil that she slid out of bed every night. Sorry. Now, people that are in this state have not discovered their true identity. They suffer from a tension and a pull and a duality between what they seem to be and what they really are. And they know that the mask and the face are not the same. They know the way they appear to others is not the way they are on the inside. Now, what's Freud's explanation of that tension and that anxiety? Well, Freud says people are anxious and unhappy because they wanted to do something and were afraid to do it. Remember his language about the id and the superego? The id, or the instincts and so forth. The id wants to do something and the superego says, no one crushed it, and they became very anxious. That's not the real reason. People have a tension, people of this kind, have a tension not because they wanted to do something and didn't do it, but because they did something and wish they hadn't, which is very, very different. Now let me give you an example of that, because this is particularly common, this attitude, among the young. A boy and a girl in college went out auto riding. And the boy was telling the girl, you know, it's marvelous how the world has changed. We're now in a universe of great freedom. All the old sex taboos have been done away with. We can put anything we want on the stage today and on television. And furthermore, we do not have to obey any of the old moral laws simply because any of the consequences of sex have been done away with. Psychology has told us not to be worried if we break what was formerly called a moral law. And so he argues and argues with the girl until he finally breaks down her virtue, as he did in this particular historical case. It happened. On the way back, he said, now let me give you a little advice. You must never tell anybody about this. Never. First of all, never tell the man you're going to marry. Don't tell any girls in the dormitory. They won't like you, or they'll be suspicious of you, or they'll tell other boys, and then you'll just become common property among all of them. Then watch yourself. Look out for venereal diseases. All changed. Why did he say one thing on the way out and another thing on the way back? It was the mask on the way out. It was the face on the way back. So people know they have a mask. even when they deny it. And young people, college people at this age will sometimes become very aggressive in defense of the mask. And particularly against parents, when the parents correct them. They become very angry, much more angry than they should, and the reason is they're afraid of exposure. What are the parents going to do, tear off this mask? There are many other characteristics of this age, but I see I have only 6 minutes and 28 seconds to tell you, so we'll not be able to develop it. Then, too, we might also say in this connection, this is a dangerous thing to talk about, and I'm not complaining against social justice. May God grant us all social justice, but it can very well be that sometimes people are interested in social justice to cover up the want of individual justice. They will plead a great love of neighbor in order to cover up a want of true love on the inside. So these are the masks and the face. Now we come to the third and the last. Third and the last stage is where there is a mask and no face. This is identity. Now we come to the real self, but this is hard, to tear off that mask. Tearing off that mask in order to be one's true self, getting rid of all shams and pretenses and make-believes, almost puts one in exactly the same position as the Israelites before they went into the Promised Land. The spies they sent out came back, and they brought news of great abundance. Here were the grapes that were carried on poles by men. This is the fruit and abundance of this Promised Land. But on the other hand, they were told the walls went up to the heavens and the men were giants and as thick as grasshoppers. They wanted to go in, and they were afraid to go in. And so one wants to tear away the mask, and one is afraid to do it. But the moment one becomes unacceptable to self, that's the point. Unacceptable to self, one begins to be very acceptable to God. This was brought out very well, remember, in the woman taken in sin. Here the Pharisees had found the woman in adultery, so they said. Just think of the snooping that went on, huh? To have caught this woman in adultery. And here they bring her to our Lord. They said she should be stoned, which was indeed the Mosaic law. So was he going to be just and have her stoned, or was he going to be merciful? If he was merciful, he would disobey the law. What did he say? He said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And he began to write. What we wrote, we do not know. But he looked at them. I think he looked at one of them through the mask. And he wrote the word thief. Looked at another, wrote the word murderer. Looked at another, tore off the mask, and wrote adulterer. And they left. They left one by one, beginning with the eldest. That's interesting. It was the older men who first tore off the masks, not the young. The old are more convertible, evidently. The old have passed through so much sham, they're ready to get rid of it. And then he said to the woman, "Woman, where are they that accuse thee?" She said, "They are not here, my lord." And he said, "Neither will I. Neither will I accuse thee." So her mask was torn away, and so was their mask. Let the young, therefore, who are seeking true identity, be sure of the identity that they seek, that it's not a mask, and they'll never discover their real self until they've gone through the troubling of the waters. It's only then that paralyzed souls are cured, like Augustine. And then it is, when the mask is off, that one can say with Augustine, our hearts are restless, and they cannot find peace until they rest in thee, O Lord.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
How long does time seem to last? Do you know how long I have now to say goodbye to you? Seconds are ticking away. Now they're coming to an end. Just 20.